Back with another opening. I know what this one is. It's the most recent to arrive in the mailbox, but I haven't opened it yet. Not protected in a bag or a board, sadly, and it seems pretty thin. So it looks like we will be going to our TV time remaining program. This is, I've never seen this before, and this was a must-have as soon as I saw it, and I didn't have to pay through the nose. It does have a rip through the program, as you can see, but I knew that when I bought it, so that was fine. This is from 1979 NIT between Ohio State and Maryland, which is not a big deal now that they're in the same conference, but at that time it was a big deal, as I was those two, along with Texas Tech, were my favorite universities. Still would be that way if Maryland wouldn't have went to the Big Ten. It broke my heart to have to choose one or the other. But I was as big a Maryland basketball fan as I am Ohio State football fan. So you will still see Maryland basketball things from anything from their ACC days. This is kind of a thin program. It was from the Ohio State traveling to Maryland in the NIT. It talks about the NIT and the Terps then home, the famous Cole Fieldhouse. Head coach Lefty Driesell. They finished 19-10 last year, or in this particular season. The second NIT for Maryland under Driesell, and they had won the NIT in 1972, and in 1974, when they had the classic ACC tournament loss to NC State, that in the game that determined the NCAA tournament had to start inviting more than one team from a conference. Maryland was invited to play in the NIT, which they would have likely rolled the victory in, being that they were the fourth-ranked team in the country, and they chose not to go. And this team is basically the team that would be the following year's ACC champions, minus center Larry Gibson, who you'll see it all the way at the top. Albert King, who Buck Williams, both future NBA players. Greg Manning, who was on he did Terps radio for years until he became the athletic director someplace. There's the scorecard, and the names are a little easier to read on that one. Team picture of the 78-79 Terrapins. And there's their opponents from Ohio State, and right at the top, Art Schlichter, who also was the quarterback and future number one pick of the then Baltimore Colts before he got into trouble gambling. Kelvin Ramsey, who would eventually spend many years in the NBA, was a first-round pick. So was Herb Williams. Spent most of his career with the Indiana Pacers. So this was a solid team from Ohio State. Keep in mind, there were more teams in the NCAA by this time, but it still was not to the 64-team tournament that would develop as it is today. And there's a look at the Buckeyes head coach Eldon Miller. So, Ohio State stats: Kelvin Ramsey and Herb Williams, each averaging over 20 points a game. Then in the back, you have the NIT bracket. To point. Maryland, who beat Rhode Island 67, 65, and 3 overtimes to get here. Ohio State would win this game, although I don't have the score in front of me. And Clemson defeating Old Dominion, or Clemson defeating Kentucky in overtime. And there's two fellows that I know that would be very interested in this game that I'm chuckling to myself for that first round matchup between Wagner and Old Dominion. And then on the back is Lido Pizza, which is now a local chain we have here in town. We have one of those. So that's a very thin program and a little damage at the bottom, but I'd never seen it, and just because of the matchup, I had to have it. So we now move to the standby program as I take it out of the bag. I'm glad I do this for some of these little smaller programs. I wasn't sure how big that one would be, but really tickled to have that. This is the Great American Bash. There's Ric Flair, Sting, Lex Luger, Dusty Rhodes. This is from the 1988 Capitol Center card, which was the second visit of Jim Crockett Promotions to the Capitol Center. This is the card. I'll tell the story as we go through it. Ric Flair, Barry Windham, Tully Blanchard, Arn Anderson. There's the good guy side, Sting, Lex Luger. Well, Al Perez is not on the good guy side, so I probably shouldn't have said that. Dick Murdoch, Dusty Rhodes, the Lightning Express, underrated tag team. Probably the lack of charisma probably hurts them a little bit. Brad Armstrong and Tim Horner. The living legend Larry Zbyszko, the Sheepherders, soon to be Bushwhackers. This was scheduled to be the Road Warriors and the Powers of Pain in those scaffold matches I talked about in one of these programs, where the very large Powers of Pain, Warlord and Barbarian, did not want to drop from the height of the scaffold, afraid it would blow out their knees, and they left and would not wrestle in these, as they would go to the WWF because of the lack of interest in taking those drops. Target, the Varsity Club. Mike Rotundo was the world television champion. There's Steve Dr. Death Williams, Jim Garvin. There's a couple shots of some matches between Williams and Rotundo and Jimmy Garvin, and Rick Steiner, who was with the Varsity Club at the time. So hip tosses. And then on the back you have the Midnight Express, as they would win the United States Tag Team titles back from the Fantastics during the Great American Bash, and immediately following this win and the conclusion of the Bash, they would begin their aborted yet big money run with Tully Blanchard and Arn Anderson. Okay, this is the Capitol Center card. We had Brad Armstrong was supposed to wrestle. Apparently he didn't wrestle, so I scratched that out. Lots of substitutes on the undercard, apparently. Tim Horner pinning Rick Steiner. Imagine that a few years later. Bugsy McGraw and Larry Zbyszko in a time limit draw. Ron Garvin beating Kendall Windham. The Russian Assassin making the Mighty Wilbur submit. Nikita Koloff over Al Perez. Ricky Morton and Brad Armstrong. I think I remember announcing Robert Gibson was injured at that time. Defeating the Sheepherders. Dick Murdoch over Rip Morgan. If you look, they've basically had to shuffle the card a little bit on the undercard. The Fantastics over the Midnight Express. A double count out. This was the Tower of Doom. Dusty Rhodes, Lex Luger, Sting, the Road Warriors against the Four Horsemen and Kevin Sullivan. This was that, on another video, they awkwardly 3 cages on top of each other, and they had to climb ladders to start the match all the way at the top of the top cage. And during this match, whether this was a planned spot or something that happened, Road Warrior Hawk was fighting with one of the horsemen, and the door flew open, and it certainly looked like, from my angle at ringside, that it wasn't planned, and Hawk had to quickly grab the sides of the cage to avoid falling out. Had he fallen out like that, it probably would have been a tragedy in the making. Now, it could also be that that was a planned spot, but it didn't look like it to me, and I've never had an opportunity to talk to anybody about that. So I wonder how that would, whether that was a planned spot or whether something went awry at the Capitol Center in the Tower of Doom, which was always, it just lacked to me. It just seemed silly. It just seemed like a really dumb idea. I mean, it wasn't that it was awful. It wasn't the worst thing I've ever seen, but it just would have been, I'd have rather seen another type of match. So that is a quick little one with the standby program, the Great American Bash. And like I said, really, really happy to add this one to the collection because I've never seen it before, and always looking for Maryland basketball programs, especially from the Lefty Drizel era. So, thanks again. Hit that subscribe button. I would appreciate it. Not very many right now, but I'm still working on being better at editing, and my lovely wife got me a tripod to help perhaps do some work with this, keep the camera a little steady, so there'll be a learning curve with that, but things are looking up, and still have plenty of programs to open and plenty of programs to go through as I collate and process my collection and put things in order. So stick with us. We appreciate the time. Have a good day.